Vav, Vayigash Daled. And before that, we're just going to take a moment to revel in the simchas of our friends. We have Rachel Kaplan's grandchildren, Mussi and Mendel Weinfeld, Shluchim in San Jose, California. Mazel tov on the birth of a baby girl. It's really incredibly inspiring to see all these Elta bubbies that are so young, and I don't know, I guess it really is true that Elta bubbyhood is the new 25. But rock on, babes. Shner Zalman Wertheimer turned 9 yesterday. Hey Teves, big Mazel tov and Shnas Hatzlacha. Chaya Sarah Mrazov had great-granddaughter twins. Her grandchildren, Mimi Gorelik and Lebi Marazov. Shluchim in Abu Dhabi had twin girls. Mazel tov, and there should only be simchas for everyone. Only simchas. We're learning in the schos of Rav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chassia, and of course in the schos that all of those who were taken from their homes should be returned immediately, and all those who were wounded should have a refuah shalema ukrova, and that Hashem should have rachmanis on us and send the geula, the Yeshua, immediately now. No perushim. Okay. Sif Aleph, Vayigash Daled, Chelek Tesvav. And this Sikha treats the last Rashi in this Parshas Vayigash, on the last pasuk. So I'm going to read the pasuk and the Rashi. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. And the family of Yisrael, the family of Yaakov Avinu, lived in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Goshen. Vaye'achazuva, and they established themselves there. Vayifru vayirbu ma'id, and they were fruitful and they increased tremendously. And Rashi says, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, the Heichon, and where in Mitzrayim did they live? Be'eretz Goshen, in the land of Goshen, shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, which is part of the land of Mitzrayim. That's Rashi's first comment there. And then on the words Vaye'achazuva, they established themselves there. Rashi says Lashon Achuza. This is an expression meaning acquiring property. So they acquired a achuza for themselves, an estate, a possession, a property, whatever term seems correct to you. Okay. Now here we are now in Sif Aleph. Ala tevas vaye'achazuva, b'pasuk ha'achar in the parshasenu, vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen vaye'achazuva vayifru vayirbu ma'id. Yeshnam beis perushim. So Rebbe says that there's two perushim on these words vaye'achazuva, which is found in the last pasuk of our parsha, which tells us that Bnei Yisrael settled in Eretz Mitzrayim. We're in Eretz Mitzrayim in Goshen, and they settled there in a way that could be called achuza. It was their estate, it was their possession. They acquired the property, and there they multiplied and they were fruitful, and they increased tremendously. Vayeshna beis perushim, and there are two ways of understanding this. Aleph, perish vaye'achazu lefi pshat hapasuk. The first is to take this word at face value. K'maisha perish Rashi, like Rashi explains, l'shain achuza, that vaye'achazu is etymologically linked with the word achuza, which means an estate, a possession, a property that belongs to you. Beis. But there is a second way of understanding this word achuza, and this is the Perish HaMidrash. And the Midrash says, Ha'aretz ha'isa ochezet behem v'tofeses osam, that the land grasped hold of them and caught them, ka'adam shabal korcha achuz ba, like a person who is held onto against their will. Hainu. This means shevayeachazu, that the word vayeachazu would not mean they possessed, but rather they were possessed. They were caught by humiloshen achiza utfisa. They were grasped. They were caught. They were, without saying it, almost like incarcerated or embedded into against their will. V'hahechrach b'derech hapshat l'shlilas perish lashon achiza. And now, what would force Rashi to say that al pipshat, it means that they settled, that they acquired a possession, and that it's not what the Medrash says, that they were ensnared, that they were caught, that they became grasped in the hold of something they had no volition about. So the Rebbe says that the imperative to say this al pipshat comes mehemshech pasuk, comes from the rest of the pasuk. Because what does it say then? Vayifru, that they were fruitful. Vayir b'ma'id, and they were increased tremendously. Mashma. From this, it's understood. Shekavanas hakasuv b'tebas vayeachazuva he lahadgish es oifan yeshivasa be'eretz Goshen. So it comes out that the words vayeachazu come to underscore the way in which they lived in Goshen. Shahaya oifan hamevi l'dei vayifru vayir b'ma'id. It was in such a way that it led to them becoming fruitful and multiplying, meaning it had to be a comfortable and positive kind of lifestyle. V'im kain. Al derech hapshat, ein linkoid keperish hamedrash, shehis yashvusam haisa ba'ifan debal karchai. And so, according to the pshat, it's clear that you wouldn't cite the medrash that implies that their living in Goshen was against their will. And when something is against your will, asher eina mevi l'deva yifru gomer. And usually, when people are being held against their will, it's not conducive to their being fruitful and multiplying and gaining strength and living a vibrant life. V'chein ein lefarish vayeachazuva miloshen achiza. And you also, al pipshat, wouldn't say that vayeachazuva is telling us that they grasped onto something. Shebnei Yisrael achazu ba'aretz al yidei hitzashvusam ba. That they were the ones who took ownership of the land, as it were, through living there. Me'achar she'az haya kasuv tzarich lemar vayeochazuva aleph b'chelam. Because in that case, grammatically, there would have had to have been a chelam and not a kamatz under the aleph. V'loi vayeochazuva aleph b'kamatz daheinu shenechzu heim al yedei haaretz. So, two reasons for rebutting the medrash. V'hine kvar nizbar kama v'kama pa'amim, and it's already been explained twice, many times, sorry. Shekasher yeshnam kama perushe razal al teva achas or inyan echad. And lately, I feel like we've been doing a number of sichos where the Rebbe underscores this, that when there are different explanations on the same word or the same pasuk or the same inyan, and
sorry, Rivky, it's not. Sorry for interrupting. It's not rebutting the medrash; it's rebutting the first parish.
Which would be what?
In other words, why the need for the medrash? Because it's not that they took control of the land, unless I totally didn't understand. The medrash comes because otherwise it would have said "Vayochzu ba," but it says, since it says "Vayochzu ba," that's why the medrash comes and says that they were controlled. Okay, sorry, unless I didn't understand.
No. Let me read it again. Thank you, Rochi. Give me a minute. I think the Rebbe is giving two reasons for why al pi pshat you can't go with this idea that the land took hold of them, that the land possessed them. One is because the end of the pasuk rebuts that, because it says that they were fruitful and they multiplied, and that's not what happens to a people. And maybe some people are thinking, but isn't that exactly what the Torah tells us happened to people in Mitzrayim? Right? And the whole idea that v'chein yanu, v'chein yirbu. So we'll come back to that. But the Rebbe is saying al pi pshat, it's not mistaber, it's not plausible that it should make sense that it's saying that they were possessed by the land and at the same time that they led a vibrant life there. And then the other thing he's saying is that if it would have meant that the land took hold of them, then it would have been, then the nakud, the way it's vocalized, the would have been different. It would have said, Vayi oichazu ba aleph b'chaylam v'lo vayi ochazu aleph b'kamatz.
So
Right,
basically,
so-
the Rebbe is saying that the medrash is a medrash. Like, why shouldn't the medrash? Rashi does pshat. So Rashi's doing pshat.
Right.
So everything's
correct.
fine.
Right. So that's what he's doing in the brackets. The Rebbe is explaining two reasons for why the pshat actually obviates. Look back to the beginning of Ha'hekrach b'derech hapshat l'shlilas perish lashon achiza. To completely obviate and negate that it's lashon achiza, that the land is grasping them. What are the two reasons that repudiate that? One is the words vayifru vayirbu ma'id, and one is the nikud. One is the way in which the word is vocalized.
Okay, but medrash never has to go according to pshat. So it's
Yeah.
nothing new that it's not according to pshat.
He's
Okay,
just,
fine.
Yeah. The Rebbe
Right,
is
okay.
explaining. Why does he want to explain that? Because he wants to underscore that the two explanations are antithetical to each other. And yet he's saying that I've already explained many, many times, shekasher yeshnam kama perushe razal al teva achaz inin echad, ein ze shehem mechulakim kolil zemizeh. When there are two explanations, or more than two for that matter, on the same word or the same pasuk or the same inyan, it's not that they are completely divided from each other, kiyim adarabah, but on the contrary, kevan shehim perushim lateva achas, behekrach loymar sheyesh b'neim shaychus misuyemes. Because they are both explanations on the same word or the same pasuk or the same inyan, then it is imperative. We are forced to say that there has to be a shaychus, even when they seem to be not only disparate but diametrically opposed. And that's what the Rebbe says here. Aval l'chayra, seemingly, beis hapirushim haniskarim, the two explanations, Rashi's explanation and the Medrash's explanation that we have cited here, not only do they not seem to be in consonance with each other or connected, but more, they're actually opposites in their content. Artsam, achuzasam. On the one hand, Rashi's explanation seems to underscore that Goshen became their estate, their possession, their land. But according to the Medrash, it seems that what's being underscored is the opposite. B'nei Yisrael ne'echazu al yedei Eretz Mitzrayim bal karcham. Not only did they not own the land, but the land owned them against their will. It grasped onto them against their will. V'yuvan, and we'll understand how these two seemingly opposing ideas could actually be part of one larger idea. La'achar bir hadibur hakodim shel perish Rashi al askalas hakasuv. By first prefacing with what Rashi says on the first words of the pasuk, shehi hakdama levayechazuva, because the first words are the preface to what we have been discussing. Visham perish Rashi alateva is Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim. What does Rashi say on the words Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim? Bnei Yisrael lived or settled at Eretz Mitzrayim. Rashi says the Heichon, and where in Mitzrayim did they live? Be'eretz Goshen, in the land of Goshen. Shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim. The land of Goshen is part of the land of Mitzrayim. Okay, and after learning Rashi Sichas for sure, but even a student of Rashi that is not zeichet to learning on this level, you wonder, like, exactly what is Rashi telling us? The pasuk is telling us by Yeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. I mean, like, what did you illuminate here? Ubiaru mefarshim, and mefarshim explain sharashi ba l'tari tzakushia ha'elim min aloshem be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. Demashma shehin beis aratzos nefrades, because the casual reader of the pasuk will kind of wrinkle their brow and they're going to be like, wait, what? It sounds like we're talking about two different countries. But Goshen was a neighborhood, or I don't know, maybe a suburb, or I don't know what it was, but it was a part of Eretz Mitzrayim. Valkein kasarashi vehechon be'eretz Goshen. Hainu sheish l'farish hapasuk ki'ilu nemar be'eretz Mitzrayim vehechon be'eretz Goshen. So what Rashi comes to add is that you have to kind of superimpose or insert the words vehechon. Where in Eretz Mitzrayim did they live? In which particular city, in which particular part of Eretz Mitzrayim? In a place called Goshen. Aval einim avan. But if that's what's going on here, Rebbe says, I have a few questions. Aleph, madua hutzrach Rashi lo hisif shi meretz Mitzrayim. V'arei muvan mitoichem shechinyani vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim vehechon be'eretz Goshen. In other words, why does Rashi have to tell us the words that Goshen is me'eretz Mitzrayim? We got that. It's in the pasuk. It's in his Dibur HaMaschil. But he doubles and redoubles and says vehechon be'eretz Goshen shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim. It's like, why? Beis al derech zeh kosher b'pasuk gufa, and along these very lines, the very pasuk is problematic. Forget that Rashi seems to be saying shehi eretz Mitzrayim, which is completely not necessary. But is it necessary for the pasuk to tell us l'shemat tzarech hakasuv loymar be'eretz Mitzrayim ulefarish be'eretz Goshen dayoi sheyoymar be'eretz Goshen? Why doesn't the pasuk just say vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Goshen? V'noida shehi be'eretz Mitzrayim, and why do we know? No, Veneda, and we'll know that it's in Eretz Mitzrayim. And why will we know? Sharei le'il beparsha, because already earlier in this parak, in Pasuk Vav, Ne'amar b'feirush she'eretz Goshen ha'isa chelek me'eretz Mitzrayim. It's right in our parsha. It's not just in our parsha, it's in the same parak. It's in Pasuk Vav. Okay, so it's 21 psukim earlier, but 21 psukim is not such a, we could remember that Eretz Goshen is in Eretz Mitzrayim. So why does the pasuk have to tell us this? And Gimel, im kavanas Rashi rak levaris arichas halashon because of Eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, and if the only thing that Rashi is trying to do is explain the elongated terminology of the pasuk, that it says be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, which seems so redundant because this is information we already have. Madua hetik min pasuk gamas hatevetz vayeshev Yisrael. Then why does Rashi put the words vayeshev Yisrael and Yisrael lived in the Dibur HaMaschil? Okay, so this is one of these sichas where we see the importance that the Rebbe places on the words that are brought down in the Dibur HaMaschil. And there are so many big chidushim in the way that the Rebbe studies Rashi, but this has to be certainly one of them. Gimel, Seif Gimel, v'habir bazeh. And the explanation is, Shebe Perushay Khan, ba Rashi liyashev estiras teichen hapasuk mi parsha koidemes. That what Rashi's really trying to do with his commentary here is to reconcile what seems to be a stira, a contradiction from in this pasuk juxtaposed against something we learned in a previous parsha. Because bevris bein hapsarim in Lech Lecha, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'Avraham, ki ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem, v'goymer, v'achrei chen yetzu b'chush gadol goymer. In Parshas Lech Lecha, in the Bris Bein Hapsarim, Hashem forecasted to Avraham that his children will be strangers in a land that does not belong to them, and only afterwards will they emerge with great wealth. Hainu, meaning shekoidem knisas b'nei Yisrael la'eretz Yisrael yuchruchu la'avor matzav shel golus al yidei sheyiyu ger goymer be'eretz lo lahem. Meaning that before they enter Eretz Yisrael, they will be forced to experience golus. They will be a ger be'eretz lo lahem. They will be a stranger in a land that does not belong to them. Aval ech yitachen lamar shebnei Yisrael yetzu yedei golus zu al yidei shehiyasa b'Mitzrayim b'shah shebepasuk kan roimanu shechayu sham b'syashvos. Okay, so we thought that the way the trajectory of events is going to be, they're going to go into Mitzrayim. They're going to be oppressed. They're going to be strangers in a strange land. But here in our pasuk, it seems that they're living in a settled manner. They're living good in Mitzrayim. Vayeshev miloshan taishav hahefach miger. Vayeshev means they settled. Being settled is the opposite of being a stranger, of being a nomad, of being a wanderer. V'oidzes, and more. Be'eretz Goshen shahisa kakosov le'il meitav ha'aretz. And earlier we were introduced to Eretz Goshen, and the Torah tells us it was the best part of the land, Mitzrayim. Uba'ofen kasima pasukan divayei achazuva loshen achuza. Hainu sha'aretz nasa lachuza shalahem. So it seems that not only are they not strangers, but they actually settle comfortably. Where do they settle? In the most prestigious part, in the best real estate, in a way that is described as an achuza, a property that belongs to them. And soon the Rebbe is going to say that achuza is also connected to the idea of inheritance. But right now we're saying they're not paying rent. They own this. Okay? So how is that a golus? V'lachein, and because Rashi is being attentive to this seeming contradiction, hetik Rashi es hatevis vayeshev Yisrael. That's why Rashi brings down the words vayeshev Yisrael, when seemingly, at first blush, we thought the only thing he's addressing is this redundancy with our being told that it's Eretz Mitzrayim, which is Eretz Goshen. Both pieces of information we already have. But no, he leads with bringing down the words Vayeshev Yisrael, because that's actually the question he's coming to address. This is what's bothering Rashi. How does this jibe with what the Eibishter told Abraham was going to happen to his children? V'kushyazu mitaretz hapasuk hamavor beperish Rashi al haisafas tevas be'eretz Mitzrayim shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, and this question is explained. This seeming contradiction is reconciled through the extra words in the pasuk, and Rashi bringing down, because the pasuk tells us that they live be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen, and Rashi says be'eretz Goshen shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, and those three words shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim really seem redundant, like 3 times redundant, because we already know where it is. The pasuk tells us, and then Rashi tells us v'heichan, and where did they live in Eretz Mitzrayim? Be'eretz Goshen, and then it says shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim. But the Rebbe is saying, by Rashi saying shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, what Rashi is teaching us is that sof, at the end of the day, Gam Eretz Goshen hi chelek me'eretz Mitzrayim, ve'ena Eretz Canaan. Don't be fooled by the word Vayeshev. Don't even be fooled by the term vayeachazu, which is miloshen achuza, which means that they possessed it, etc. Don't be fooled, because it's me'eretz Mitzrayim. It is part of Eretz Mitzrayim. It is not Eretz Canaan. It is not Eretz Yisrael. It is not the place where we belong. V'lachein, yeshivasam be'eretz Goshen nechsheves legolus, and therefore it is considered golus. Kevan shebazeh gufa she'enam nimtzoim be'eretz Canaan ha'aretz shalahem, because the very fact that they were not found in Eretz Canaan, the land that is theirs, Aretz Shalahem. I don't know why. These words make me cry these days. Aretz Shalahem, the very idea that they're not in their land. Harehim b'fchinas ger, be'eretz loy lahem. Just like Hashem told Avram Avinu. Dalet. Avol, in case you're satisfied by this, don't be. And if you're dissatisfied, good, because the Rebbe is dissatisfied so far. But this still is not computing, at least on the deeper level. Yadua shekavonas golus Mitzrayim haisa shebnei Yisrael yizdachachu sham v'al yedei ze yiyu ru'uyim lekabalas hater l'knisa le'eretz Yisrael. We know, this is a well-known fact, the Alter Rebbe spoke about in Torah in Chassidus over and over. It's explained that the intention of Golus Mitzrayim was that Bnei Yisrael should be refined, spiritually refined, in that what's referred to as the crucible. And through this, they should become worthy of receiving the Torah and going into Eretz Yisrael. The Ech Hiskaima Kavona Zu Hazichuch the Golus V'Shibud Mitzrayim Al Yidei Inyan Vayeshev Yisrael Gomer. So, in which way did this intention come to fruition? The intention of refinement, the intention of their being subjugated in Mitzrayim and being refined through that subjugation. How did that come to be? Through the inyan of Vayeshev Yisrael, that they settled. Ubiyaseh kasha, and even more difficult to understand, al pi habir b'chelek hadrasha b'Torah b'inyan vayeachazuva. And it's even more difficult to address this central theme of the intention behind their going into Mitzrayim if you take the understanding of the Medrash, that not only were they not subjugated, they were settled. Okay, so we still have to understand how this provided some type of refinement for them. But on the contrary, they became completely ensnared by the land. And so how did this give rise to any sort of refinement? Ubahaktim. The Rebbe says, we'll preface to understand how difficult this is. We'll preface with more information. Mimasha nemar vayeachazu v'loshen achiza nimtza lich'ar she'eretz Goshen haisa o memela nishara achuza v'yerusha etzel b'nei Yisrael. From the perspective of that they settled their loshen achuza, seemingly it means that Eretz Goshen was and therefore remained their Yerusha. It was somehow their inheritance. And seemingly this is not understood. How can you say about any part of Eretz Mitzrayim that not only is it a possession, but it's actually an inheritance for Bnei Yisrael? Eretz Canaan hi Yerusha Livnei Yisrael. Chidiksiv laseis lecha es Eretz hazais lirishta. Avaloi Eretz Mitzrayim. Eretz Canaan, yes, multiple times. The Torah tells us, I'm giving this to you as an inheritance. But Eretz Mitzrayim? Now, B'derech hapshat, ochein ein ze kushya. On the pshat level, this is not a difficulty. Tekevan sheyeshiva zu be'eretz Goshen nimshacha kol zman golus Mitzrayim redu shana. Simply speaking, because they lived in the land, and they lived in that part of the land for 210 years, redu. Bipashtus neifel al zeh lashon achuzah. So once you live in a place for 210 years, let's just say you can certainly apply squatter rights. Okay, so it becomes their achuzah. It becomes their parcel. Aval lefi derech hadrash deterem hamadgisha as hadrush v'hatoichen apnimi adayin ze ein ze mechaver. But if you're going according to Medrash, if you're going to according to the drash of Torah that underscores that which must be sought from the innermost understanding, then it's still not computing. But the Rebbe now is going to teach us something really, really interesting. Haradak b'Sefer Yeshua, maybe b'Shem Hadrash. So the Radak brings down in Sefer Yeshua, Sha'amor Sham, that the pasuk that tells us Yeshua kavash es kol eretz haGoshen, that there's a pasuk that tells us that Yeshua conquered the whole area or the whole land of Goshen. Koi al Goshen shel eretz Mitzrayim. This refers to this parcel of land called Goshen in Egypt, Vihi nivlas b'teich Ari Yisrael, and it was kind of swallowed up or subsumed into the cities of Israel. V'lachein nimnisa b'kasuv sham bein ha'arim d'nakala shevet Yehuda, and therefore it is counted in that pasuk as part of the cities that fall into the nakala of Yehuda. So seemingly, according to this, we might say, al kolponim al derech hadrash, liyashiv es haloshin vaye'achazuva. We might be able to use this information to reconcile this word vaye'achazu, which now we're saying is some kind of inheritance. Asher masha eretz Goshen nasasa Yerusha esel b'nei Yisrael. That the fact that Eretz Goshen becomes a Yerusha for Bnei Yisrael is because later on it would get swallowed into the cities of Bnei Yisrael in the time of Yeshua. But the Rebbe says, but it's really difficult to use this explanation. Because it's really hard to say. There's no place to say. Shebizman hapasuk vayeshev Yisrael. That now, chronologically, we're talking about a time where the Jews settled, and at that time, kfar nikras his yashvazu be'eretz Goshen b'shem achuzah, and their settling in Eretz Goshen should already be referred to as an achuzah, an inheritance, al shem ha'meura ha'asid lavoi me'er shanim la'achar. It really kind of, it's a stretch to say that it's already called their inheritance, because hundreds of years later, it would become their inheritance. Blias Eretz Goshen alidei kibush Yeshua ben Ari Yisrael. That this parcel of land would become subsumed through the conquest of Yeshua among the cities of Israel. It's a stretch. But here the Rebbe brings us, I wonder if anybody ever was aware of this medrash. I certainly was not, and it was so interesting. Vabir b'zeh isa b'medrash, the medrash teaches, Shepare nasan l'Sara eretz Goshen lachuza. When Sarah was taken to Pare's palace, and we know that things didn't go so well there for Pare, and he showered Avram with presents and let her go, obviously. But the Medrash says he gave her this land as an inheritance. Ulefichach yashvu Yisrael be'eretz Goshen shehi shel Sarah imenu, and that's why Bnei Yisrael went to live in Goshen, which belonged to their mother. V'nimtza shebnei Yisrael kiblu es eretz Goshen b'Yerusha misara. They actually went to settle the land that they had received as an inheritance from their great-grandmother. Ella she'al pizeh mischazekes hakushya. The only problem with this, okay, this is interesting. The only problem is that this further strengthens the question. Keitzad yatzu b'nei Yisrael yedei golus Mitzrayim. How are they yetza? How did they fulfill this thing that they had to be in Golos al yedei shehiyasam be'eretz Goshen b'shah shegoshen haisa shayeches lahem ki Yerusha amamela loy hayu ger be'eretz loy lahem. Now the question is even stronger. If Bnei Yisrael have to be in Golos in order to later go out and be Makabel the Torah and go into Eretz Yisrael, how is this a Golos if they were not only living Be'eretz Ba'ifin Hisyashvos, they were living in a comfortable way, in a settled way, in what the Torah refers to as the Meitav HaOretz, the very best part of Eretz Mitzrayim, and they were living in their ancestral homeland, basically. They were living in a parcel of land that belonged to their great-grandmother. So how are they fulfilling this idea that they had to be in Golos, a ger, be'eretz lo lahem? That's the problem. Hey, see if hey, v'yuvan, and we'll understand this al pi ha'mevor b'Torah. We'll understand this through what the Alter Rebbe taught in a Maimer in Torah. Shekol protei avodah shel Golos Mitzrayim b'avodah kasha b'chomer or b'veinim gomer kayamim gam ba'ofen ruchani. That all the aspects of the Shibud Mitzrayim also need to be understood as things that they accomplished spiritually. Be'esek HaTorah, in their involvement with Torah, K'di'isa b'Zohar, like the Zohar brings down, Ba'avodah kasha, when the Torah says Ba'avodah kasha, zu kushya, this is they're asking questions, asking a kasha on psukim in the Torah, on ideas in the Torah, and the ideas in the Torah. B'chomer, when it says with Bilvania means with bricks, B'chomer means with the help me here.
Cement.
Cement. Thank you. Da kal v'chomer. This is a way of learning kal v'chomer, meaning that if this is true in one situation, how much more so is true in another situation. Ubilvenim da libon halacha. And when the Torah says levanim, which the pshat is bricks, this is the clarification and the purification of halacha b'chulei. Ubishah she'adam Yisrael oisik va'amel ba'avodah hakasha d'Torah. And when a person, Yisrael, a Yid, is involved and is toiling in the difficult work of learning Torah properly, so he fulfilled the mandate of difficult work, the Golos Mitzrayim, that's inherent in the Golos. The Eina Tzarech Lasses is begashmias. Okay, so now we're coming to a turning point in the Sikha, where the Rebbe is going to illuminate how there are different modalities that could have been effectuated in Mitzrayim, and it would all have been a way of their going through Golos Mitzrayim. Okay, so far he cited the Zohar that tells us that it could have been that they wouldn't have to do the Avodah Kasha Begashmias because they were doing the Avodah Kasha Beruchnias. K'maimer HaMishnah, like the Mishnah teaches us in Pirkei Avos, Kol HaMekabel Olav Ol Torah, V'Hadir B'Zehu Ol Torah. The Mishnah talks about every person that takes upon themselves the yoke of Torah. And it's not saying the path of Torah, the study of Torah. It's calling it the yoke. Shemekabel al atzmai es ha'ol ha'avodah kasha chulei hanal b'zayar shel Torah. And what does the Mishnah say about such a person that accepts upon themselves the yoke? And by definition, the word yoke means that it's not a walk in the park, that there is difficulty involved. The Mishnah says that a person that accepts upon themselves the yoke, and so that means that they're engaged in Torah study, not just when it's comfortable and not just when it's easy and not just when they have extra time, but they have accepted it upon themselves in a way that is referred to as a yoke. It's constant, it's consistent, it's not always easy. Then it's taken off from them the ol malchus v'ol derech eretz. Then they are disencumbered from the yoke of whatever place they live in and the regular yokes that life put upon us. Because the truth of the matter is Nobody goes through life without being yoked, right? We all have responsibilities. We all have difficult responsibilities that we have to carry constantly and consistently. But the Mishnah says, but if you yoke yourself to Torah, then I will take away from you certain other difficult things. And so in like fashion, we apply this to what we're learning. Gam b'yosim be'eretz Goshen avru b'nei Yisrael ufalu b'inyanim shel golos v'shibod Mitzrayim. Even when they were in Eretz Goshen, and it was a comfortable life, and they were living on their ancestral land in some way because it belonged to Sarah, but they were still involved in the exile and the servitude of Mitzrayim. How? Al yidei yigiyasam b'Torah, b'veis haTalmud. Yasdu Yaakov Uvanav, through their toil in Torah, where in the Beis HaTalmud, which is a term for a yeshiva that was established by Yaakov and his sons. Let's remember that the Torah says, "Yaakov shalach lefanav." That's Yehuda shalach lefanav. Yaakov sent Yehuda before him, and Rashi says, why? To establish yeshivas. And now we come to what's embedded in Rashi's seemingly simplistic, maybe even redundant perush. Like this is the kind of Rashi that if you were teaching, I don't know, elementary school or even high school, you'd look at it and be like, oh, nothing here to say. Let me find a Rashi that's juicy, that's interesting, that's actually teaching us something. But of course, the Rebbe teaches us very differently about every single Rashi, and he says that embedded in Rashi, on the strata of Yena Shel Torah, that which has to be squeezed out like wine, the hidden. What is Rashi telling us? Bitkufa harishayna de Golos Mitzrayim. In the very first tkufa, in the first era, in the first part of Golos Mitzrayim, be'ez hisyashrus b'nei Yisrael ba vayeshev Yisrael, during the time that they were living comfortably, vayeshev Yisrael, loy chalala hagalos avoda kasha v'chule begashmias. So the physical aspect of Golos was not included in their life. Adrab, on the contrary, hadavar haya az ba'ifin kazeh shehurga shehamakam hu meitav haaretz vehem nimtzaim sham ba'achuzasam. On the contrary, they lived a life where it was clear to them and it was obvious, and they recognized that they were living in the best part of the land, and they were living there in a way that they owned the land. Hakol yadu vehikiru shebnei Yisrael nimtzaim ba'artzam shalahem. Everybody recognized that they lived in a land that belonged to them. Sheba noyagim heim kecheftzam ve'enam tachas shibud Mitzrayim, and there they would comport themselves according to how they wanted to live, and they were not under the servitude of Mitzrayim. V'shibud hagolos bali debitui rak ba'avoda kasha de Torah. And how was Golos Mitzrayim expressed? Through their servitude to learning Torah. That was the first part of the Golos. Vav, see Vav. Avaladayin dorish bir. But we still have to explain. Kevan shasayf yarshu b'nei Yisrael if you perish on Medrash Eretz Goshen misara. But at the end of the day, we just learned that the Medrash teaches that Eretz Goshen, they inherited from Sarah Imenu. So but we still are bothered by the words that Hashem said to Avraham Avinu, the Eretz loy lahem, in a land that is not theirs. And the explanation is as follows. It's true that they did have a link to Eretz Goshen because it was something that Parah had given to their mother, their grandmother, the great-grandmother Sarah. But Hare loy haisa b'teicha dargas hakdusha shahaisa be'eretz Yisrael. So yes, it belonged to them legally, but it was a aretz loy lahem. It's not theirs. It doesn't. It's not something that has a shaykhus to them. Be'etzem. It doesn't behoove them to live in a land that doesn't have the level of kedusha that is in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz asher ein Hashem lekecha ba meireshis hashana bad akris hashana. The land which has Hashem's eyes upon it constantly. They weren't living in that land, and therefore, no matter what you want to say about how they lived in Goshen, it was an Eretz loy lahem. V'zeh haya teichen in hagolos be'eretz loy lahem. Be'ez his yashvusam be'eretz Goshen gam b'tkufa harishona. So now the Rebbe is going to delineate or elucidate more clearly what form did it take in this first tekufa, in this first era of the Golos, that they were living in a land that's loy lahem, that doesn't belong to them, that's not for them. He says, B'nei Yisrael hitstaru al himatzam b'makom she'enai eretz asher enai Hashem lekecha ba. B'nei Yisrael were in a state of upset. They were in a state of angst that they were found in a place that was not Eretz Yisrael. Ubazeh gufa be'eretz eretz loy lahem liloy hachashibos v'hakdusha haro'ir lahem. It's a place that does not have the importance and the holiness that befits them. Ubitzar ze gufa yatsu yidei choybas chelek mishibud u'meitzar degolas Mitzrayim. And through this angst that they felt, they fulfilled their chayva, their obligation of shibud, of being enslaved, u'meitzar, and feeling the constriction of Golos Mitzrayim. I always say I don't want to editorialize, so I'm not going to editorialize for more than 2 seconds. But there's something so important here. The tsar that we have to feel that we're not in Eretz Yisrael. The actual tsar. Zayin. Aval av shetchilas galusim b'mitzrayim ha'isa ba'ifin devaye achazuva kanal. Now, although at the beginning it was in a modality of Vayigash, that they owned the land, that it was a Yerusha, etc., etc. Hare matzav ze atzme haya yerida legabe matzavam madrigasam be'esha hayu be'eretz Canaan. Even so, this was a descent in their situation and in their level from being in Eretz Canaan. The davar ze nasan mokim lekach sheyitzdarchu la'achar mikein la'avar his golus v'shiba mitzrayim kipshutam. And just being in this situation of descent actually further devolved and brought them to a place where they had to go through the golus and the shibud, the servitude, in a more on a more pshat level, meaning physically. V'hainu, meaning shela'achar siyum tkufa rishona zu bizman vayamas Yosef v'chol echa v'chol hadar hahu. After the conclusion of this first era, which is marked by the words in the Torah that Yosef passed and all of his brothers passed and that whole generation passed. Okay, so that whole first generation that had kept them on a certain level, after that, Asher b'siba zu hiskil hachisaron be'inyan hayagia b'Torah debeis hatalmud shel Yaakov v'Vanov. And for this reason, that whole first generation passed, there started to be a deficit in their toiling in Torah, in the yeshiva that Yaakov and his brothers had set up. And this came along with a lessening and a forgetting of the angst that being in a land that is not theirs should have been. In other words, in plain English, they began to acclimate. And that was the beginning of the real Shibud Mitzrayim. They began to feel comfortable. They no longer felt the tsar. And then, Heichal Shibud Mitzrayim Kipshutai. And that's when the Shibud, the servitude of Mitzrayim, started Kipshutai. Like in earnestness, physically. Ad shehaya nira ki'ilu oisa yom nichnesu leMitzrayim. And it was such a horrible and terrible shibud that every single day they felt how terrible the situation was, as if it would be their first day. In other words, they did not slide easily into the Stockholm syndrome. They did not easily make peace. It was so horrible, they could not get acclimated. Shaychusa shel eretz zu livnei Yisrael nishkacha, uvnei Yisrael hischilu lahargish es hamariros de meitzar v'golos. So their connection to Goshen, in terms of their having inherited from Sarah, that was eclipsed. That was completely forgotten. That was a different era. That was over. And now Bnei Yisrael began to feel the true bitterness of their constriction in exile. V'zehu sheba Rashi lahadgish b'perushai. And this is what Rashi comes to underscore with his commentary. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim. We understand why he leads with the words Vayeshev, because that's actually the point of what he's trying to teach us. Vehechan, and where did they settle? Where were they living in an oifen of Isyashvus? The Eretz Goshen, shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim. Yes, at the beginning, it's true that the Golus Mitzrayim was effectuated through Eretz Goshen, through that, not only that geographic location, but that way of life. Meitav ha'aretz, it was the best part of the land, it was a good life, and their yegia, their toil, was not with physical bricks and mortar, it was their toil in Torah. Yes. But even then, Le'idach yesh ladashi eretz may eretz Mitzrayim. But Rashi is teaching us that even then, when again, look at Pasuk Chav Zayin, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen vaye'achazu vayifru vayirbu ma'od. Yes, it was a good life, and they increased tremendously, and they were meitav ha'aretz. And we now learned that it even belonged to their mother Sarah. But what does Rashi tell us? The Eretz Goshen shehi may Eretz Mitzrayim. It's of Eretz Mitzrayim. Ze gufa shebnei Yisrael hutzuchu lisyashi be'eretz Goshen hayekvar yerida be'eretz Mitzrayim. The very fact that they had to live in Eretz Goshen and not in Eretz Canaan was already a descent into a new reality called Mitzrayim. V'yasera mizu. And even more than this, Eretz Goshen atzma nefcha ledarga hashvela b'yoser de golos Mitzrayim. Shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim. And after some time, when that first era was over, Eretz Goshen, which had been meitav ha'aretz, it had been the best place to live, and it had given them a good life, actually was transformed into the lowest aspect of Golos Mitzrayim. B'shah shaloi nitzlu as meitav ha'aretz, the Eretz Goshen l'avodas Hashem, when they did not use the opportunities that this meitav ha'aretz, this best part of the land, offered them in their avodas Hashem, va'adrab, on the contrary, not only was that not the case, but the iconic, very famous pasuk in Devarim, Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat, Vayishman, they became fattened, they became complacent, Vayivat, they kicked, they rebuffed, they rejected Hashem. Azai be'eretz Goshen gufa, sheba choyu b'nei Yisrael b'chol meshach zman ha'golos, na'aseh shibud Mitzrayim kipshutai. At that point, it became the literal shibud Mitzrayim. Sif Ches. Now, HaPerish HaNal, what has been explained early. Somebody wants to ask something?
I wanted to ask, what does it mean? What does it mean that Mishmar, like, what did they do wrong in Goshen? That was the Adarabah here. What's the Adarabah here?
I think what the Rebbe is saying, that Loi nitzlu es meitav ha'aretz the Eretz Goshen l'avodas Hashem. They did not use out the opportunities that were presented to them by being in Meitav Haaretz, by being in the best part of Mitzrayim and Eretz Goshen to serve Hashem. And so once they didn't do that, it kind of, the whole thing became inverted. From being the Meitav Haaretz, it became the worst part of Eretz Mitzrayim. The Shibud became the darkest. Ches, HaPerish Hanal, the above mentioned explanation is Siv Dalet, de be via achazu, in the word via achazu, that they grasped, Lashon Achuza. Shebnei Yisrael Yorshu as Eretz Goshen. Okay, because Achuza could mean possession, it could mean an estate, it could mean a land that you own, but very often it's linked to Yerusha. The Rebbe explained how in this case, it's not just a place that they owned, but it was a Yerusha. Shebnei Yisrael Yorshu as Eretz Goshen. So this idea, Oile bekana echad gam in pu'ulas golus Mitzrayim b'pnimius ha'inyanim. So this very much parallels and jibes with the innermost understanding of what Bnei Yisrael accomplished in golus Mitzrayim. And through this is also explained that even though al pi pshat, it's not absolutely the case. It's not necessary to say that every time we have the term achuza, it includes also the implication that it's something that's inherited. However, Ramaz Rashi betevas lashon achuza l'teichen hayirusha, but the Rebbe sees an allusion. He says it's true. Al pi pshat, you don't have to say this, but he sees an allusion in the words of Rashi, lashon achuza, b'yena shel Torah hatomon b'perish Rashi, and he's going to explain how in the yena shel Torah, in the wine, in the deepest parts of Torah, that are Tomon, that are embedded, that are maybe even like buried in Perish Rashi, it hints to this idea of Yerusha, which is connected to the idea of what we had to accomplish in Mitzrayim on the deepest level. V'habir bazeh, and the explanation is as follows. Mitzrayim haisa, kavanas golus Mitzrayim haisa, shebnei Yisrael yivararu v'yikhu imam es nitzaites hakadusha shahayu b'Mitzrayim. The innermost kavana, the intention of going into Mitzrayim, it's true, it's true that was because of our sins, but the innermost intention of going to Mitzrayim was not to punish us. It was to refine us, and that we should be able to take with us the nitzaitis hakdusha, the holy sparks that were mired in Eretz Mitzrayim. V'zeu hateichen hapnimi, and this is the deeper explanation of the words that the Torah tells us when they left Mitzrayim, vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim. They drained Mitzrayim. After the 10 Makkos, before they left, the Torah uses the expression, they drained Eretz Mitzrayim. Keperish Chazal, and the Gemara says, Asa uha kimitzuda she'ein ba dagan. They made Mitzrayim like a silo or a granary that is empty of grain. Kimitzula she'ein ba dagim, like a pond or a body of water that has no fish. And the deeper explanation is not the physical things they took with them, although we're not repudiating that they took physical things, of course, but on a deeper level, Shebnei Yisrael biru ve'elu es nitzutze hakdusha me'olam hatoihu shahayu be'eretz Mitzrayim. But Bnei Yisrael refined, they extricated these sparks, they elevated these holy sparks that were rooted in olam hatoihu, in the higher level, the higher world, where there was too much or, not enough kalim, and so the kalim imploded. and the aspects of those kelim embedded themselves in the Olam Hatikun, in the Olam Ha'asiyah Hagashmi, and they took with them all of the Nitzaitis Kedusha from Tayu that were at Eretz Mitzrayim. And we know, Chassidus teaches, that there are Rapach Nitzaitis Kedusha, Avodas Perach, Rapach. And Rapach is Bigematria 288. And how much did Bnei Yisrael take out? Erev Rav. They took out Rav. They took out 202 of the Nitzaitis. And here we is, still working on the project for those 86 last Nitzaitis Kedusha. These must be really, really heavy, big, huge, humongous sparks. V'zais merames Rashi b'dvarav vaye'achazu ba lashon achuza. And this Rashi alludes to in his words that vaye'achazu ba is a lashon achuza. Hakavana v'hatachlis devayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim golus Mitzrayim. What was the true intention? What was the goal of their settling in Mitzrayim? Having golus Mitzrayim? Shebnei Yisrael yirshu sham al yedei zeh, that Bnei Yisrael should inherit through the golus as hanitzaites shala iris nitayu. The nitzaites, these sparks that originate in Tayu. Ukiyadua maimer chami admar. And the Frierdiker Rebbe has a maimer, and he explains shesidrei hayirusha etzel umas ha'olam heim al derech diksiv. How does inheritance go by the nations? Like it says, uven ein loy unisatem es nachalase la'achiv. If a person doesn't have a son, you give the nachala to their brother. And because Esav is Yaakov's brother, Bnei Yisrael Yoshem es ha'eres d'tayu. So Bnei Yisrael inherit the Iris of Tayu. We know that Esav's neshama originated in Tayu, originated in a higher place than Yaakov Avinu's. Tess. Al pi kol hanal. So based on everything that we've explained, move on hakesher ben beis hapirushim beinin vaye'achazuva. Now we can see how the two explanations, Rashi's explanation and the explanation of the Medrash on the words vaye'achazuva, are actually both part of a larger whole. Although they seemingly seem to be saying contradictory things, that's not exactly the case. According to the Pshat, Rashi tells us that the word vaye'achazu hu milashon achuza. It's etymologically linked to the word achuza, which means an estate, a possession. Mipnei shebepashtos ubechitzanis inyanim harei oz bisman parshas Vayigash adayin lahitchil hashibud galos Mitzrayim. Because it speaks to that era. Because right now, where we are chronologically in Parshas Vayigash, the actual shibud of Golus Mitzrayim did not begin. Va'adarabba, on the contrary, azadayin hayanika she'eretz Goshen hi achuza etzel b'nei Yisrael canal. It was actually widely understood and recognized that they were living in land that actually belonged to them. It was their inheritance. Aval fi hamedrash. But according to the Medrash, which explains and reveals the innermost understanding of something, Vaye'achazu hu milashon achiza. Vaye'achazu is a lashon of they were grasped, they were taken in a hold against their will. Sha'aretz haisa oichezes bahem v'toifeses oisam shabal korchai ochaz ochuz ba. That the land took hold of them and it grasped them in a way that was against their will. Meaning, me'achar shebepnimi yusah haisa hayeshiva be'eretz Goshen initially read the Mitzrayim shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, because as soon as they went down, it's already May Eretz Mitzrayim. It's already a Yerida. It's already a descent. It's already leaving Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, Ein Hashem L'kecha ba. It's already not where they belong. Va'af Yisera Mizu, and even more so, Nisenes Makayim L'Shibud Mitzrayim Kipshutai. And immediately there is the possibility for the Shibud to take hold of them in a very simple, physical, literal way. Mimela nimtza. So therefore, shebehelem ubepnimis kvar hoisa yerida la'eretz goshen ba'ofen sha'aretz hoisa oichezes behem v'tefeses hoisam shabal karcha ochaz ba. In other words, the Rebbe is explaining it's not a contradiction. Both things were happening at the same time. During that very era where they felt comfortable, and they felt like they were living in a land that they had inherited, and it was Meitava Aretz. It was already a situation that the land had taken hold of them. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else is drawing these correlations, but I'm just like, I feel like what's jumping out at me is like the last 50 years in America. It's like we were living Meitava Aretz, and we were living Ba'ofen Achuza seemingly. And but it was already the May Eretz Mitzrayim. V'hatam v'hakavana hapnimis lahechra shebeini b'yachazu lefi perish hamedrash haaretz ha'chazet choleisam merumas b'yena shel Torah. And the reason and the intention, the innermost intention to what's being taught to us here about v'yachazu according to the Medrash, Mirumas b'yena shel Torah is alluded to in the Yena shel Torah asher b'perish Rashi. How? Ha mechavin b'himatzam b'golos Mitzrayim b'derach hechrach. Because he is alluding to, again, the achuza, which, according to the Medrash, mudgash b'lashon achuza achiza. In other words, the Rebbe is saying something really, really amazing and important for us to understand at this point where we are in our lives now. That what Rashi is alluding to is that what they had to do in Eretz Mitzrayim only happened. In other words, their inheritance was able to happen through the fact that they were grasped by the land. They went down in Eretz Mitzrayim not willingly. It was b'derech, the Rebbe says, bal korcham. It was against their will. But it was the purpose of getting the Yerusha. So in other words, it's a double-edged sword, and one is not possible without the other. And Rashi is alluding to both of these things by saying Loshen Hachuza. Kedei sheyirshu es kol hatoiv b'nitzaitzes d'toyer shenaflu b'shvira b'mitzrayim v'achrei chen yetzu b'chush gadol. That the only way that they would be able to come into the great goodness of the nitzaitzes of Tohu, the spiritual wealth with which they had to leave Mitzrayim. They had to acquire this. It had to become their achuza. And this was all found in Mitzrayim. And later they would leave Berchush Gadol. This was only possible through their being grasped by the land against their will. And so, our being here is not chalila a wash. It's not wrong. This is where we had to be. This is where we were brought. This is where our avoda is. This is where the nitzaitis are that we have to extract and that we have to elevate. And at the same time, we always have to be so acutely aware of the fact that this is a eretz lo lahem. We don't belong here. We're not of this land. We're in this land, but we're not of this land, because this land is me eretz Mitzrayim, like Rashi says. Shehi me eretz Mitzrayim. Even when it feels like Goshen, it's me eretz Mitzrayim. That's our sikha for today.